I've been tracking this story for weeks, and I'll be honest with you. When Laurent Nunez's plane touched down in Algiers on February 18th, most of the media completely missed what was happening. They saw a routine diplomatic visit. I saw something else. France and Algeria had just signed a security cooperation agreement, counterterrorism coordination, intelligence sharing, judicial cooperation, police collaboration. On the surface, it looked like two governments doing what governments do, shaking hands, issuing joint statements, moving on. But here's what stopped me cold. Algeria shares 1,400 kilometers of border with Mali and nearly 1,000 kilometers with Niger. Two countries that just threw France out, two countries now openly aligned with Russia, two countries that were, until very recently, the entire foundation of France's military strategy in West Africa. When you see that one geographic fact, the handshake in Algiers stops being a diplomatic footnote. It becomes the most important move France has made in Africa in years. Not a return through the front door, they can't do that anymore. A return through the back door, Algeria's back door. And to understand why that matters, we need to go back to how France lost the front door in the first place. I want to push back on something you'll hear from mainstream analysts. The dominant narrative is that France withdrew from the Sahel, as if Paris made a strategic decision to reposition, and sold to the French public as a necessary fight against jihadist insurgency in one of the world's most unstable regions. It ended in a series of defeats that French officials are still struggling to fully acknowledge. Mali went first. After a military coup in 2021, the new junta in Bamako turned on France with stunning speed, ordering French forces to leave in early 2022. French troops departed to jeering crowds, some waving Russian flags. Think about that image for a moment, because Paris certainly has. Then Burkina Faso followed in January 2023. Niger came next after another coup in July 2023 sent the country's pro-Western president fleeing, and the new military leadership declaring France unwelcome. Over 5,000 troops sent home, military bases dismantled and handed over, uranium concessions nationalized. Decades of post-colonial influence, the kind that doesn't appear on maps but shapes everything from currency policy to army doctrine, erased in the space of a few years. The three countries formed the Alliance of Sahel States and invited in Wagner Group mercenaries, later rebranded as Africa Corps, to fill the vacuum France left behind. Last month, some of you commented that France was finished in Africa. I disagree then. This Algiers deal is exactly why. France isn't leaving Africa. They're just changing their zip code. Now, most commentary on French-Algerian relations will tell you the main obstacle between these two countries is the legacy of the 1954 to 1962 War of Independence. That 20th century ghosts are the central problem. I think that framing misses the point entirely. Yes, the history is real and it matters, but the actual crisis that nearly destroyed this relationship was far more recent and far more revealing about what both sides actually want right now. In July 2024, Macron announced that Paris supported Morocco's sovereignty claim over Western Sahara. Most Western coverage treated this as a routine foreign policy adjustment. In Algiers, it was received as a betrayal, and a deliberately provocative one. Algeria is the principal backer of the Polisario Front, the movement fighting for Western Saharan independence, and views Moroccan territorial expansion as a direct threat to its own regional influence. The Algerian government's response was immediate and surgical. They recalled their ambassador from Paris, not temporarily, not for consultations, but indefinitely. Senior officials publicly accused France of acting like a colonial power. And here's why that accusation carries so much more weight than it might seem. This isn't rhetorical. This is a country whose independence was won at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives in a war against France. When Algerian officials use that phrase, they are invoking the foundational trauma of the modern Algerian state. December 2024, Algeria summons the French ambassador and accuses the DGSE, France's foreign intelligence service, of carrying out hostile acts on Algerian soil. January 2025, a French interior minister tries to deport an Algerian social media figure. Algeria refuses to accept the deportation and calls it illegal. French right-wing media explodes. February 2025, Algeria expels 12 French diplomatic staff. France retaliates within days and expels 12 Algerian officials. This was the worst state of French-Algerian relations since independence. Not strained, broken. And then, exactly 12 months later, France's interior minister lands in Algiers and signs an intelligence deal. I've been in this space long enough to know. Nations don't reverse course this fast unless something much bigger than feelings is at stake. Here's my core argument, and I want you to hold on to this because everything else flows from it. This deal wasn't driven by diplomacy, it was driven by geography. And once you see that, the timeline stops being confusing and starts being inevitable. Algeria sits on the northern edge of the Sahel. Its southern border is, in practical terms, the back wall of Mali and Niger. That vast, porous desert corridor, 1,400 kilometers with Mali, nearly 1,000 with Niger, is the only meaningful land approach to those countries from the Mediterranean world. If you want visibility into what's happening inside the alliance of Sahel states there is exactly one place to position yourself. France understood this with what I can only describe as painful clarity after 2023. No troops in Mali, no bases in Niger, no formal diplomatic relationships with either government. Paris had essentially gone strategically blind in one of the world's most volatile regions. Russian military contractors were operating there. Chinese mining companies were expanding their footprint. Jihadist networks, JNIM, ISGS, and affiliated groups, and France could see almost none of it. Algeria's situation was different, but converging on the same point. The alliance of Sahel states isn't just a political inconvenience it's a security emergency. Algeria shares nearly 2,400 kilometers of combined border with those three countries. The 2013 terrorist attack on Algeria's In Amenas gas facility, 40 workers killed in a siege by jihadists who had staged from the Malian desert, is still a defining reference point for Algerian military planners. That attack proved what Algeria's generals already knew. Instability in the Sahel doesn't stay in the Sahel. And now, just south of that border, Russian-backed juntas were providing political cover for the same jihadist ecosystems Algeria has spent decades fighting. In January 2026, a Turkish-manufactured Malian military drone allegedly entered Algerian airspace and was shot down. Algeria blamed Russian backing of Mali's junta. President Tebboune had said publicly back in 2022 that the money spent on Wagner's Sahel operations would be better used on development, a direct criticism of Moscow that was extraordinary for Algeria's normally careful diplomacy. So when France came to Algiers, not with demands, not with lectures about democracy, but with a proposal built around shared vulnerability, Algeria had every reason to listen. Two countries, different problems. Same geography forcing the same calculation. So, what does this deal actually buys France? Let me be direct about something the official statements won't say out loud. France is using Algeria as a listening post. The language of the agreement, counterterrorism, intelligence sharing, judicial coordination, police cooperation, sounds technical. Each category is a specific form of strategic access. Intelligence sharing means Algeria's granular knowledge of its southern frontier. Algeria's forces patrol 2,400 kilometers of Sahel border. They know which armed factions operate in which zones. They track convoy movements. They notice when unusual aircraft land in remote desert strips. They monitor the pattern of life across territory that French intelligence hasn't been able to observe directly since 2023. That information is, in the cold language of intelligence work, strategic gold. Judicial cooperation means France can request Algerian assistance tracing financial flows and arms transfers. Want to understand how weapons from Libyan stockpiles ended up in the hands of groups operating in Mali? Algeria can help. Want to map the funding network sustaining jihadist organizations? Algeria has access that French intelligence cannot independently generate. Police cooperation means Algerian law enforcement operating in border towns and desert outposts where no French officer has any presence now coordinates with French counterparts. Ground-level intelligence gathered in the human reality of actual border enforcement enters the shared picture. And here's the layer that most analysis is missing entirely. When Algeria shares counterterrorism intelligence on JNIM or ISGS movements, that intelligence doesn't exist in isolation. Jihadist groups, alliance of Sahel states forces, and Russian military contractors all operate in overlapping terrain. You cannot track one without tracking all of them. When Algeria shares what its forces see on the Malian border, France also receives, as a byproduct, intelligence on Russian Africa Corps deployments, Chinese logistics operations, and the operational patterns of the juntas themselves. Everything France lost visibility into when it was expelled, recovered through one agreement. This is the part most Western commentary gets completely wrong, and it frustrates me every time I see it. Algeria is not a passive actor here. It's not a pawn. It's not being instrumentalized by France. Algeria is executing a sophisticated balancing strategy, and frankly, it's working. Here are the facts people gloss over. Between 2018 and 2022, Russia supplied roughly 73% of Algeria's military equipment. Algeria operates Russian S-400 air defense systems. It recently took delivery of Su-57 stealth fighters, becoming the first foreign country to operate that aircraft. Russian instructors train Algerian forces. Russian technicians maintain Algerian weapons systems. This is a deep military relationship, not a superficial one. But three things happened that put serious strain on it. First, Russia's war in Ukraine disrupted arms delivery schedules globally. Contracts to Algeria are delayed. Maintenance is backed up. Updates aren't happening on schedule. Algeria finds itself dependent on weapons systems that Russia is now too busy to properly support. That's a strategic vulnerability that Algerian generals think about constantly. Second, BRICS. In August 2023, Algeria applied for membership at the Johannesburg summit. China, Russia, and South Africa reportedly supported the candidacy. Algeria wasn't selected. 6 countries made the cut: Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UAE. Algeria was left out. For a country that sees itself as a continental leader, the largest nation in Africa by area, a founding voice of the non-aligned movement, that was a humiliation. And Russia, which claimed to support Algeria's candidacy, hadn't delivered. Third, the Sahel itself. Russian backing of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger has created exactly the unstable militarized southern border that Algeria fears most. The drone incident in January 2026 wasn't an abstraction. It was a live provocation, enabled by Russian political support for Mali's junta. Algeria is furious about this, and the France deal is, in part, a direct message to Moscow. When France came offering a security partnership, Algeria saw an opportunity. Not to abandon Russia, Algeria isn't naive about French intentions, but to leverage France against Russia. By signing with Paris, Algiers sends an unmistakable signal to Moscow. We have options. We are not your client. Treat our interests seriously, or we will deepen our alternatives. Algeria is simultaneously operating Russian weapons systems, accepting French intelligence cooperation, maintaining Chinese economic relationships, and refusing to join any formal alignment bloc. That is not confusion. That is strategy. Algeria has spent 60 years refusing to be anyone's client state, and it has no intention of starting now. Here's where I want to zoom out, because the Algeria deal doesn't make full sense until you see the wider shape of what France is constructing. France cannot send troops back into Mali or Niger. That is simply not possible in the current political environment. Not in the Sahel, not in French domestic politics. The era of Operation Barkhane, of open-ended French military presence in West Africa, is over for the foreseeable future. But France can do something else. It can build a ring of intelligence relationships around the alliance of Sahel states. Algeria to the north, Nigeria to the south, where French and American security cooperation continues to deepen. Chad to the east, where some French military presence persists. The Atlantic-facing states of Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire to the west, which remain broadly aligned with Paris. The Sahel becomes, in effect, a surveillance perimeter. France cannot control what happens inside the alliance of Sahel states, but it can watch. It can build pattern recognition. It can identify moments of opportunity, and it can wait. France's long-term bet is not complicated. The Russian model in the Sahel will eventually disappoint. The juntas of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have made enormous promises to their populations: security, sovereignty, development. They have not delivered on most of them. The jihadist insurgencies that justified French intervention haven't been defeated. In several areas, they've expanded. Africa Corps has proven effective at protecting the juntas themselves, at suppressing internal dissent, at securing presidential palaces. It has not proven effective at pacifying the countryside or delivering the economic stability that populations actually need. France is betting on failure, not hoping for it, betting on it as a strategic calculation. When the alliance of Sahel states eventually hits a crisis, when a junta collapses, when Russian support proves too expensive or too politically toxic, when a military leader needs a different patron, France wants to be positioned to respond. Not with troops already on the border, but with intelligence, relationships, and visibility that enable rapid action when the window opens. The Algeria deal is infrastructure for that moment. Patient, quiet, deniable infrastructure. So, where does this leave us? The Alliance of Sahel states will notice this. They may not say so publicly, but Mali and Niger are not running their intelligence services on the assumption that Algeria is neutral. A formalized French-Algerian intelligence relationship is a material change in their strategic environment. Expect tighter Malian counterintelligence. Expect pressure on Algiers through other channels. Expect the alliance to accelerate its own attempts to deepen ties with Russia and China as a counterweight. Russia will respond too, carefully, as Moscow usually does in these situations. Expect accelerated arms deliveries to Algeria, or at least promises of them. Expect Russian officials to offer better maintenance terms, faster updates, more attentive relationship management. The competition for Algeria's alignment, always present beneath the surface of Sahel geopolitics, will now become more intense and more explicit. And Algeria will navigate all of it with exactly the opacity you'd expect from a country that has spent 6 decades turning great power competition into strategic leverage. The handshake in Algiers on February 18th, 2026 looked quiet, routine, 2 countries putting a bad year behind them. What it actually was? France finding a new window into a region it was thrown out of. Algeria using French desperation to extract recognition, resources, and room to maneuver. A Russian-backed bloc in the Sahel suddenly being watched by its own neighbor. And a set of calculations, French, Algerian, Russian, regional, being quietly reset around 1,400 kilometers of desert border. No explosions, no screaming headlines, just signatures. So, where does this leave us? France isn't finished in Africa. They're rebuilding from the outside in. And Algeria, playing every side with remarkable discipline, just became the most strategically important country on the continent that nobody is talking about. Keep watching Algiers. The next move in the Sahel will be made there.